Warning: this podcast may contain spoilers as well as coarse language. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Our Anime podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about LGBTQ representation in anime. And for that topic, we have actually a bunch of guests with us today. Firstly, we have better known than us, anime YouTuber, ThePedanticRomantic.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Crispy.
Hey.
And Tactician Jack.
Hello.
So we brought on these guests with kind of the specific intent of having, when we're talking about LGBTQ issues, people who are within that group actually discussing how they feel anime represents them. So if you guys want to sort of talk for a minute about your own personal, I guess, space in the LGBTQ community before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So I'm the G in the LGBT plus. I am a gay cisgendered man. So I kind of struggled a lot with my sexuality through life, I guess you could say, and finally came out of the closet in college thanks to the help of a, I guess, lover, you could say. And since then, I have been happily out of the closet and haven't looked back.
Hey.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people know Pedantic, but if you want to talk for a minute.
Yeah, I am the ThePedanticRomantic, known for YouTube hot takes and being extremely queer online. I'm a trans girl, I'm a lesbian, and I'm here to kick some ass.
I'm a lesbian. I figured it out in high school. It was kind of like a wandering road, like, what am I? Like, I was kind of like figuring it out. I was like, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, but I'm settled into, I'm lesbian, cisgender, yeah. I forget what other parts are good. Yeah.
All right, so before we kind of jump into our deep dive on here, we thought we'd discuss a little bit at first, just kind of an overall our opinions on how LGBTQ plus representation is done in anime, just overall in the medium, before we start diving into specific shows and the history of all of it.
Sure. So I guess just to start, I personally would say that it's not great at all, really. There are a couple glimmers of hope here and there, especially in certain sectors of LGBT representation over others. I think it is slowly getting better, but I think it still has a very, very long way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in comparison to, like, other media, it's not too bad. I feel like all media kind of has some ways to go with it, but anime definitely feels like it's lagging behind in one way or the other more than, like, Western TV or books are.
So would most of you agree with that more so than Western TV, anime has some kind of issues with its presentation, or do some of you disagree?
I might disagree. I think gay men in anime probably have it the worst off. I think there's... Sorry, Crispy.
It's all right. I know.
Yeah, like lesbians in anime, probably the best.
Yeah,
to be
right.
honest.
Like, it's very mixed on that front, but there's some sort of interesting artistic traditions and sort of genre spaces that have led to sort of pockets of empowerment, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't provide a one-to-one analog necessarily with Western stuff.
Yeah.
And then trans rep, I mean, it's really bad in the West. So by virtue of that, maybe it's better in anime. Like, y'all, it is real bad.
Like, all the cross-dressing characters in anime, there's, like, way more cross-dressing in anime. Like, that's not the same thing as trans, obviously. But, like, I mean, it's kind of similar. I don't know.
There has yet to be a wandering sun for Western television.
Exactly.
As far as, well, actually, there was the It did have some problems because of the lead being notably transphobic, but there was
Transparent.
Transparent. That's
Yeah.
There was the show Transparent, but I have not seen it, so I don't really know how well or not it did. It was very popular and very well regarded by critics.
Yeah. All I know is Jeffrey Tambor and that whole mess, and I kind of stayed away.
Yeah, he kind of got booted during the Me Too movement.
Wait, what about like Sense8? Wasn't that supposed to be like really good for trans people? Or,
that was kind of
know.
like all of them, wasn't it? It was just kind of a big LGBT fest.
But yeah, anyways, back to anime. Sorry.
Yeah, right. No,
No, all good. I think it's good to just get a little bit of a feel for the comparison before we kind of jump into why anime might be different from Western or other media.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a good segue to get into our section on just kind of history. We want to give a little bit of background before we jump into the discussion of kind of how anime has represented different groups, just to see why it's doing things differently from from I guess the media of a different culture.
And yeah, the greatest ill in regards to of trans people and trans issues in anime is certainly the pretty common cross-dressing / Okama stereotype mockery. That's pretty well worn at this point, and fairly often pretty transphobic in execution. You know, it's not always done poorly, but a lot of the time it is. I think there's
sorry, go ahead.
a number of solid trans characters, but as I sort of went over in my video on the term trap a few weeks back, or a month back now already, Jesus. That whole otoko no ko joso trend and character archetype within anime lends itself to a lot of characters that are written as trans people, and it's tough to deny that they're trans, but then are like not necessarily viewed as trans. So you get like Ruka is solid trans rep, except for the fact that the guy who wrote her insists that she's just a gay guy. So like, you know. Yeah,
a lot of conflation there.
Yeah. With like those kind of characters, it feels like sometimes like I don't necessarily like I mean the stuff you mentioned, other stuff, but like I don't necessarily read them as trans. Like I can see why other people would, but like because of how they're kind of vaguely written, it's hard to kind of really see them as trans. Like with like Ruka, it's kind of like I feel like it could go either way. It's kind of because it just feels like with like Ruka, I'm going into specifics a little bit, but like Ruka kind of is just, it felt like just was interested in Okabe and wanted to be a woman for Okabe. I don't know. Maybe that.
Ruka's such a weird case that kind of exemplifies, I guess, the overall vagueness of a lot of representation. I guess we'll get into that more, but I totally get like Ruka was
yeah. I feel like that's going to probably be a long topic because yeah. That's a character that gets a lot of time and focus, if not all of it is good.
There's a reason I refuse to bring them up in that aforementioned video, because that would have derailed things greatly.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the, I think you gave the intro for it already, the culture and history part of it.
Right.
I think it's really important analyzing this kind of stuff in any way to understand the context of the culture that this media is coming from. I feel like a lot of what we have been saying, a lot of what we're going to be saying in this episode does have universal value, but there are going to be some interesting differences. So the first overarching like statement that I really like to use, and I found this on like the trashiest of anime top 10 list news sites, the wisest thing I'd ever thought I'd see on one of these sites was homophobia, transphobia, and that whole group of bigotry is so different contextually in Japan and a lot of the East than it is in the West. In the West, we have this tradition of Christianity and other Abrahamic, I forget if that's the right word for it, a lot of those Abrahamic religions like Judaism and Islam that kind of ingrained the homophobia and transphobia through religious texts and practices. And I'll stop there. I was going to say that. I'll stop there. Whereas in the East, a lot of it comes, especially in Japan, from a desire to match a status quo, to appear normal, to fit in with, and to contribute to society. And that's really, really, really broad strokes too. But I feel that's a huge distinction in why maybe a lot of Eastern media was a lot more open to representing LGBT plus people in media earlier than Western civilizations, regardless if that representation was healthy or not. So to go over, I think, a quick overview of the history in Japan specifically, just a super, super brief overview. A lot of the first, evidence of homosexual relationships we can see in Japan comes from a lot of practices from their feudal history with the Shudo and Wakashudo relationships. A lot of times these relationships were between an adult and a prepubescent or adolescent boy. They were, however, strictly consensual, or so they say. And sometimes a lot of it had to do with apprentice-master pairing. So, like, say, if you're going to blacksmithing, as an example, it could possibly be that pairing of the master blacksmith and the apprentice would be in this kind of sexual relationship. And sometimes they actually would seek external legitimization from maybe like permission from the parents or the local government, something like that. After that, there was also a lot of history of male prostitution in Japan and a lot of other instances of sexual freedom, I guess you could say, in Japan up until it was about the Meiji Restoration period, where the non-shoku attitude of homosexual rejection came in, a lot of it stemming from wanting to be more westernized and fit in with that. And of course, during the time, thank you, Christianity, homosexuality was very, very frowned upon at that time. A lot of the criticism, especially, interestingly enough, was aimed at, I guess, what we would call modern day the bottom in male pairings, the person catching instead of pitching, usually criticizing their health, their desire for pleasure, and even criticizing them, saying they thought of themselves as women in order to even want this in the first place. So we got some nice conflating homosexuality and transgender people in there. A lot of this came again to a head later in the 19th century and early in the 20th century with kind of this pseudoscience sexology that started to come out. Funny enough, mirrored a lot from the sexology being taught in Germany at the time. We all know what Germany was doing in the early 20th century. Oh,
that wasn't a Freud reference?
Right. I wouldn't put Freud past it.
Any excuse to dunk on Freud.
But a lot of that same criticism towards the bottom of the relationship came out again conflating homosexuality and transsexuality, like, oh, they must think they're a woman in order to want this, and just so much wrong. The general, up until World War II, the general consensus in Japan was homosexuality was seen as a threat to health, family, and the future of the species. Fun stuff.
And I think one other thing that's worth noting in and around that Meiji Restoration area is the sort of the rise of nationalism and nationalist sentiments as a threat to queer people. Because, of course, if you're getting it on with your guy friend, you're not hooking up with a lady and producing children to go off to war for the homeland. And so the rise of those beliefs obviously sort of play a role in that as well.
Thank you. The militaristic nationalism, I totally meant to say something about that. I'm glad you interjected. So then we come to post-World War II, where actual sexology and study of sexuality comes out. It's not perfect at first, nothing ever is, but it slowly gets the ball rolling, as well as, tying it back into medium, the beginning of male-to-male literature starting to get published. I guess what we would call yaoi or BL today. Probably a little different back then at the start, but it did help to bring the topic out of obscurity, as well as obviously more literature on lesbian relationships, as well as the prominence of transgender people in media. I'm sure Pedantic Romantic can go into that more in a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, a lot of this entertainment media was still seen as morally reprehensible, no matter how much it was being more and more accepted, or I guess published and distributed more than accepted. A lot of the literature actually needed to be labeled as a perversion in order to avoid government censorship. Fun fact. Nowadays, it's looking better, but Japan seems to still be behind a lot of other countries. In 2013, the Pew Research Center did a study of homosexuality and the support of homosexuality in a ton of different countries, including Japan. And in Japan, they found that overall, 54% of those polled were in support of homosexuality compared to 36% who didn't. This is kind of nice. There is a majority now.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing for them. Breaking it down, you can kind of see some trends that really shouldn't surprise most when it comes to age groups. 83% of people aged 18 to 29 supported homosexuality, so a lot of support in the younger groups. 71% of people aged 30 to 49 supported it too, so even in kind of the middle age groups, there's a lot of acceptance. And the big the big downfall comes in the 39% of people aged over 50 or over supported homosexuality. So obviously a lot less acceptance in that older group. When it comes to gender, 47% of men support homosexuality, whereas 61% of women support homosexuality. Thank you, Yowie. So, as you can see, the older you get and the more masculine you get, the less you in Japan support homosexuality. That was definitely an overgeneralization, but
Yeah.
you get the joke.
Yeah.
That's kind of an overview. As I said, Pedantic, I know, has a lot of information about transgender people in media. And then I think after that, I also do want to just ping Jack a little bit. I know you have some stuff on some lesbian media.
Hit me with the Yoshi and Nobuko.
What was that?
I said, hit me with the Yoshi and Nobuko.
I think I wrote her down some... Wait, that was an author, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I don't have a lot to say about that, just kind of like summing up what Class S is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can do that after the trans thing. That's kind
Okay,
of
cool. So yeah, the sort of time period upon which I most read is post World War II, and there's this one French film in particular that I mentioned in the Wandering Sun video. I'm Conchinelle, something like that. It's French. And that featured a popular French singer of the time who was herself trans. And that was pretty popular in Japan in the mid-50s,
Wow.
which sort of contributed a lot of visibility to the whole concept and fed into a number of things that were going on. So sort of decade to decade, the way trans people were self-identifying was sort of fluid. It was adapting to what happened. So earlier on in that 50s time period, the English gay boy it was used for trans people, slash like cross-dressing feminine male prostitutes who were quite popular. Sort of a throwback there. And then you got Blue Boy as into the 60s, and that led to the Blue Boy trial, which is where Japan formally outlawed gender reassignment surgery. Which I believe the trial went through in the early 60s. And it was not until 1996 and 97 that the Blue Boy trial was reversed. So for about like 30, 35 years there, it was just straight up illegal in Japan, which contributes in part to Thailand's popularity for Japanese people to go get SRS.
Interesting.
And
correct me if I'm wrong, the reason it was outlawed with the Blue Boy trial was because the doctor performing the surgery was convicted under anti-eugenics laws.
Yep.
Which
Oh,
blew
weird.
my mind. Like, that's not the same thing, Japan. What the heck?
Because, of course, SRS would prevent you from reproducing in many cases. Technically, you're sterilizing people. And ironically enough, now in Japan, if you want to get your legal gender officially changed, you are forced to undergo medical sterilization. So unfortunately, that anti-eugenics law that outlawed SRS for a few decades is not coming in clutch and protecting trans people in that regard today.
Yikes.
That's sort of the big thing that, like, the UN Civil Rights Council and the such gets on Japan for in regards to trans stuff, because forced sterilization, it's pretty yikes.
Yeah, that's pretty yikes. I don't know what else to say about that, but yikes.
That's a yikes a mungo.
And so up through, the 60s into the 70s, trans bars, cross-dressing bars, there's obviously, especially in this early time where things are less defined, intermingling between the communities, were very popular. You start to see a rise of sort of trans people as a archetype in entertainment. So in, say, variety shows, they'll come on as guests, and there's a level of acceptance there that's sort of in excess, in many ways, of what you get in the US, where you just sort of be branded as a freak or a deviant, because there isn't that same sort of Judeo-Christian moral opposition to it inherently. If you're a sideshow, there's a level of nominal acceptance that comes with things. And so you had a number of celebrities of the time who were just trans people who'd show up and be quirky and entertaining little oddities as they continued the more broadly trans people to be entertainers in these bars and what have you, bars and clubs. And then, that goes through the 70s and 80s. As Alicia, Social Annie Girl, covered in her series on Japanese transmedia representation on YouTube. In the early 2000s, a legacy J-drama ended up having a trans guy as one of its characters in a season, and that really raised the visibility to the general public. That was in the early 2000s, right around when Wandering Sun started publishing as well. And so you got these handful of key pieces of media that brought some visibility to things. And it just sort of progressed into today here. I believe right after that J-drama in the early 2000s, we started getting some more reform in terms of law in regards to trans people, making gender marker changes and things like that legal, if not easy. And I think that's just about it in terms of giving you a general overview of how things have progressed through the decades here.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay, so for lesbians, I kind of just have Class S definition. If you watch Yuri at all, you probably know Class S, but I'll just go over what it is. It's a literary genre. It's kind of like a adjective. Like for literary genre, relationships, influenced by the Takarazuka Review, which you might be familiar with if you saw Revue Starlight last season, or by now it'll be 2 seasons ago. So it's an all-woman theater troupe that features heterosexual romances in its plays, but since it's an all-woman theater troupe, they're portrayed by women.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And relationships in general, they were kind of like, so women would like watch the plays and be like, oh, I'm gonna do that, I guess. So like that like Class S kind of aesthetic is like all girls school, like Catholic school or whatever, and they like, oh, let's practice romance between like the senpai that's like all like handsome or whatever, even though she's a girl. And then the Kohai is like, oh, I'm so innocent. So, like Strawberry Panic, Maria-sama ga Mitoru, or Maria Watches Over Us, those kind of anime, it's like very like with like schoolgirl practicing romance, you know, adolescence, graduation, before moving on to real romance, real in quotes, romance with men as an adult.
Yikes.
And while it did have a lot of issues, like I said, with like the being kind of like it had the roles that were like heterosexuality kind of like imitating, like it wasn't just like, and then the adolescent and not taken seriously necessarily, and then it seems that it was much less sexual and more just kind of like platonic romance, I guess. But that said, it did play a positive role for a lot of like actual lesbians, like you mentioned the Nobuko Yoshia.
Yep.
Like she was a lesbian author who wrote Class S literature. So like it wasn't all bad, you know. It did do good stuff for like a lot of lesbians, but at the same time, it's kind of outdated now.
Mm-hmm.
It was a start, though.
Yeah, it was a start, but it's not really something like that I personally, at least, am really interested in watching anymore. I was kind of more into it a year or two ago, whatever. Anyways, but yeah, for anime kind of influenced by it, like I said, did I say Strawberry Panic? I probably
think
did.
so.
Maria Watches Over Us, Oni-sama, and then Yuri Kuma Arashi is also influenced by it, but that one's kind of more of a takedown of it than just kind of a example of the genre.
How so?
Because Yuri Kuma Arashi, that's the one by Ikuhara, that it's kind of like I think it's kind of deconstructing it. I didn't finish watching it, but it's more examining how lesbian relationships are looked at in Japan and criticizing that.
Yeah, there's a quote, I believe, from Ikuhara. If he said something like, Yuri Kuma Arashi is going to, like, destroy the, like, conventions of Yuri or like, change the way the Yuri genre is forever or something. And that would have been a bit more true if it had come out, like, a decade prior by 2015, which is, I think, when it started airing. Yuri had started already...
It started kind of, evolving.
Shifting away from the Class S tropes and becoming, allowing itself to be more sexual and move beyond just that sort of idealized pure romance and what have you.
Yeah.
But his was certainly one of the works in that move towards a new kind of Yuri.
Yeah. I'm disappointed I didn't get to it before this. I have the Blu-ray. I have the Blu-ray sitting on my shelf, and I didn't get to it.
I dropped it, actually, but not because of the lesbians or anything. I just kind of couldn't get into it otherwise, so it's probably his weakest, in my opinion. But yeah, so probably not missing a whole lot. Hopefully you do enjoy it, though, because you own it.
I bought it. I hope I enjoy it. Yeah, I think I will. I'm partway through Utena, and so far I like his style a lot. But yeah, something you mentioned about the all-female theater troupe stuff especially reminded me of kabuki theater, a huge tradition in Japan. All-male theater with the masks, where there would be heterosexual relationships in the shows, but they were all played by men. So I think I even saw that going through some of my research and just, I guess, decided not to mention it. But now that you reminded me of it, I'm like, oh, I should probably mention that. That's important.
But yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, if we want to...
One other thing I want to just toss in here, because my girlfriend is a huge Yoshio Nobuko stan. Yoshio Nobuko, as Jack said, Tactician Jack said, is the sort of pivotal writer in Class S, and she was a lesbian. And she wrote the first lesbian novel to have a happy ending for the couple. And this was like 20 years before we got the first novel in the West to do so.
Wow.
And so she was really able to push the boundary and get away with a lot within the sort of confines of Class S. Once the war efforts ramped up and that sort of family-centric nationalism was on the rise, she sort of had to scale back what she was doing and conform to the more fleeting platonic romance of Class S. But it was a really fascinating haven for sort of early lesbian expression, that whole Class S genre. And even like things like the flower motifs and shoujo that pop up all the time, those were introduced by Nobuko Yoshio as well. So she's got a really far-reaching influence, and she's a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's cool.
So yeah, has everyone kind of said what they want to say on the history front?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we want to move into specific shows and kind of representation, what I thought might make sense is if you guys first started listing off shows that you think do representation well in a lot of ways, so we can kind of see what's right before we start going into more of the detail of what has been done wrong.
Yeah, sounds good.
So yeah, we'll start off with ThePedanticRomantic.
Cool. So as for trans stuff, there is, of course, Wandering Sun. That's sort of the marquee, the trans anime. Obviously, always asterisk for the manga for Takatsuki. If you're looking for trans mask rep, you may be disappointed. You will be disappointed. And then some other notables, I would say, are Oran High School Host Club, which very much so lends itself to a non-binary reading for its main character, Haruhi, and is pretty great in that regard. One I always love is Tamako Market, which has just an incidental character as part of the shopping mall that serves as a setting for the series, who she runs the flower shop, and she's very transcoded. Yeah, those are some of the good ones.
Okay, so actually, bouncing off of Oran for just a second, where you have the good sort of representation of non-binary in Haruhi, what are your thoughts on Haruhi's father, mother? I think they refer to her as father in the show, but yeah.
So that's definitely one where I'd have to rewatch the series to get a real read on. I watched it a while ago before I even figured out my gender stuff, so I was not particularly woke to that, and didn't pick up on it too much. Mm-hmm. I went back and just looked through sort of what exists on them, and just in terms of character summaries and what have you. And there's some lines that seem to lend themselves to just like a cross-dresser working in a cross-dressing bar, trans bar reading for them. And then others that more lend themselves to a trans reading. So that's one that's a bit more up in the air. Oh, and another I'll mention is Tokyo Godfathers. One of the main characters, Hana, I think is pretty good.
Right. Yeah, this is actually something I wanted to bring up with you, because I'm kind of unsure as to my own thoughts about that representation, because I personally love the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting because I think this is a really Hana was her name, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I felt like she was a really strong written character. Sorry, it's been a while since I've seen the film, but I really enjoyed it. But there were points when it felt like she was kind of played up as like a stereotype or comedically in a few places, and so I was kind of curious as to sort of your thoughts on that.
I think. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, there's just there are actually a couple of things in that are interesting to me in terms of how I can't tell if I necessarily think it's executing it well or badly, in terms of how the rest of the cast kind of makes fun of her as well, but that's not necessarily even played as like a good thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's interesting and sort of complex is all.
No, for sure. I think one of the first things to note is that the subs sort of color your perception of Hana in an interesting manner if you're watching it with English subtitles, in that they use the slur tranny as a translation of what she's being referred to as on a number of occasions, where that doesn't necessarily fit, and so it sort of implies maybe a worse treatment of her than is being given.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, the subs I had often used like homo or even like fag. Like,
yeah.
Feel free to blurt that bleep, because I don't even like to say it, but like I can't like type it out or anything. But yeah, they often like called her that, and I was kind of like, I don't know, I was kind of like side-eyeing it a bit. I'm like, really? Like, but I couldn't really tell if it was the subs or the script.
Yeah.
But either way, I was kind of like, no, that's not, please.
A lot of the time, the term that's getting translated as tranny there is okama, which is a sort of like caricature and archetype of it's sort of like drag aesthetically. Some trans women fall into that, and it is often used dismissively towards trans women, but depending upon the context, I don't think it's accurate to translate it as tranny in a number of regards, and it doesn't necessarily have that like same level of strength and severity.
So it's potentially derogatory, but not necessarily derogatory?
Yeah, and not as strongly derogatory either. And as you mentioned, the film sort of makes fun of all of its characters. It is a comedy, and it does play on sort of the plights and the character shortcomings of its entire cast, who are a band of homeless people who've sort of come together and have this camaraderie where they're very much on each other's cases. And that doesn't excuse things on its own outright, because sort of mocking just a homeless cis straight guy as opposed to mocking a trans woman have obviously different contexts and cultural weights, and one can cause more harm than the other. But by and large, I was really happy with how it handled things. It never went particularly far. A lot of the mockery she does get, if like homo is thrown at her or whatever, it's clearly done with like a lot of endearingness and in the same manner that you would to just a friend of yours. And especially for like 2003, which is I think when the film came out, like I'm thankful. I'll take that, man. For 2003, like you're doing well, Satoshi Kon. Just the fact that you're conscious of trans people and like included one as one of the main characters of your film. There's points where I could quibble about it, but I'm not gonna complain. Like I'm entirely content with how the trans rep in Tokyo Godfathers turned out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like even if like it didn't age perfectly, it still aged pretty well. Overall,
ultimately the film, as much as it may make fun of her at points, never fails, never stops taking Hana and her gender and Hana as a woman seriously, and that's like the main important thing to nail. And with that, I think it's done a solid job. Right,
and that degree of derision is something that is something that this character may have legitimately experienced, and so I think in a certain sense it might be bad even if the other characters making fun of her sometimes were cut out, since the film does treat her like a serious character.
Yeah. And it has the whole trans bar that she was sort of raised by the other girls there, and presents them as fantastic people as well. So to like show that sort of that breadth of trans experiences on top of everything else, good stuff.
Nice. I wanted to quickly bring it back to Oran, because you mentioned a couple of things that interested me. I just watched Oran this past summer, so it's pretty fresh in my mind, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with Haruhi's parent, in that it's super, super vague and contradictory. I personally read it as she was trans, just based on a couple lines that seem to kind of overpower the idea that it was just a man cross-dressing, but it is super vague. That something very consistently frustrating with a lot of representation. Mm-hmm. And I did like that you think Haruhi is non-binary, or I think you used a different term, but I totally saw that, and I was discussing with some friends back in the summer about it, like, oh wow, it's cool they have a non-binary or possibly gender fluid main character, and everyone's like, nah, it's just part of the it's just part of the plot, it's part of the comedy. I'm like, but guys, she literally says the things about not okay.
There's the thing in the first episode, or like the first or second episode, it's just like I literally just don't care, which to me,
no, for sure.
I had a friend in college like that. She didn't care which pronouns you used. She didn't care about gender. She just dressed however the heck she wanted to, and it was Haruhi totally reminded me of her. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, I've been keeping sort of like low key about it, not for like any particular reason, but because I'm for the most part just like a straight dude. But I also identify with that myself. Like I'm sort of non-binary personally. Mm-hmm. Not that it's not like a huge deal in my life, but yeah, I got that feel from Haruhi, and that's part of why I actually identified with her as a character. So,
yeah,
very strong show overall.
Personally, I kind of disagree, but it's been like over a year since I saw Oran. Maybe, over a year. So I just might like be forgetting stuff, but I just didn't really read either of them that way. Though it's probably like it's a vague thing, so.
Yeah, the main one that does it for me is I believe it's in the first episode. No, it might be in the start of the second. But there's a line from Haruhi where they say, "Yeah, like I don't really care about gender either way."
Exactly.
And that to me reads as some for non-binary, agender, whatever. They just sort of like don't care about the concept of gender or conforming to it or existing within it.
I think there are a couple of valid interpretations of that, just because of Haruhi's father, and how it could very well be that Haruhi perceives her father as kind of like this, and kind of gains this understanding that like all of these sociocultural tags don't necessarily matter. But again, I'm not sure like if that's distinct from non-binary. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Personally,
I actually don't know that much about the like the definitions on that front, but.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the show didn't really go much further than the lines that we're quoting. So
no,
yeah,
no, like that wasn't the point of the show or what it was trying to explore. But yeah, so yeah, I guess we're stuck with what we have.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jackson.
Personally, I kind of feel that way, but it's more like I don't mind being female, but it's like it's not a big deal, but like. I wouldn't say I'm non-binary or anything.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
So it might be just something more like, because remember that her school, it's like very, on both sides, it's very kind of hyper-performing each gender. Like the women, like they're like very feminine and female. They've got the dresses as uniforms or whatever, and they're very girly. And then the males, they're all like dressed up. It's like, so it may also be kind of a product of her environment, because she's saying that to the rich people who are very binary in their gender presentation.
They're very Western.
Like, even if, like, sorry, I'm thinking, like, even in their presentation, like, because most people who are, like, binary gender, they're more loose with how they present themselves sometimes,
No, right. That's very fair.
But
you can
then
certainly
where she is, it's like, it's much more rigid with how you present equals how you identify. So that could just be part of that as well, I think, maybe.
Mm-hmm. You can definitely be gender non-conforming without being literally trans. And that's a relevant point in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the ambiguity of trans rep, I guess, where certainly with gay or lesbian rep, we get similar things where we're just sort of grasping onto subtext of romance and having to figure out where the bounds of those lie. Similar things happen with gender, except maybe even more so because gender is so abstract and kooky.
Yeah, and there's so much like that, so many tags that are kind of like tied onto gender, which is part of what Haruhi is kind of, well, sort of deals with every once in a while. But like, because the show sometimes kind of goes there, but it doesn't all that often in terms of just kind of breaking down the like, I guess what is presented as one or the other. Yeah, it's a good question, but again, probably one that we're not going to get a canon answer to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the more rigid gender roles from the upper class people in this rich school in Oran. I have no doubt it is in part intentional from the author that the school is also very, very westernized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially kind of old Renaissance-esque Germany, Central Western Europe westernized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's probably why it's a really good dub, because it just works like that.
Also,
Sorry,
they got a good dub cast too.
That's
so
true.
That
They
helps.
did get a really good dub cast.
But yeah, like some shows kind of just work better as dubs if it's got a good cast.
If they execute, yeah.
That's all for Transrep, though, at least for the overview of series. So, oh yeah, for good rep. Yeah, let's.
So let's delve into the not so good.
Okay, we want to do that before we hit like the good rep of other.
I kind of feel like it'll be good to keep that all sort of condensed so that we have a through line of like what's good, what's bad, and then like final recommendations there.
No, that's that makes sense. One I'll mention is Ixion Saga GT or DT. I forget what the specific little addendum there is. But there's a trans woman on the cast there, Marion Dell. And she's sort of a mixed bag. Cause she's a cool, fun character. She is some ways into transition. I don't know exactly like what she's doing one way or the other, but she does have breasts. But there's sort of a running gag with her, where when she gets angry and starts shouting, she goes from like her typical, relatively like conventional feminine voice to like deep man voice that like comes out when she's angry, because she can't keep in control. Her stubble gets made fun of on occasion, and so just things like that, basically mocking shortcomings in passing from trans women is not great.
A lot of the stuff made fun of there is pretty traumatic to some trans people too, isn't it? That seems pretty insensitive.
Yeah. No, it's not great.
Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a whole lot of negative representation out there as far as trans, especially just with like recent.
Oh yeah,
trends.
I mean,
Backstreet Girls.
Yeah. There's that. To summarize, a trio of Yakuza members mess something up, and so the sort of fate they've been assigned from their boss is that they're shipped out to Thailand, forcibly transitioned, surgery, hormones, all that, I believe, and they're going to be an idol group now, and like make back the money that way that they cost the organization.
Okay.
Who comes up with this stuff? Like that's like conception level of like, wow, this is a terrible, offensive idea. There is no way we can ever make this work unironically. What were you thinking?
Like,
yeah,
I feel like that's meant to be a comedy premise, but it sounds deeply horrific. Like, I don't...
Yeah. I haven't watched it at all.
Very dark comedy?
But...
yeah.
I don't know, it's kind of hard. It's like, oh, we're gonna, like, reassign my surgery as a punishment, first of all.
Oh, yeah.
Like...
Yeah.
There's a lot going on with that premise.
I watched the first few episodes of it, and I mean, it's not terrible, and there's even some points of interest. So like obviously forcibly gender transitioning people is very bad, and that aspect is not good. but it does like end up exploring gender because the characters are like coming to terms with the fact that they're now like in women's bodies and like oh, this is kind of like cool, and like to an extent maybe they like it or identify it and stuff. So it's not like enough to redeem or overcome the premise, of course.
Right.
But it like does stumble into ruminating on some things that are mildly interesting just in its breakage of a cisgender normativity there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do morbidly appreciate the detail that they shipped them off to Thailand based on what you talked about earlier.
And I guess speaking of ship after Thailand, let me toss in one more good example to lighten the mood here. From Hero Academia. What's his name? Cat. One of the trio
one of the cat girls. Yeah.
Cat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The wild pussycats.
Yeah. It's one of the little like detail inserts in the manga. His character bio is just like one day he flew to Thailand and became a guy or something like that. And so it's
female to male.
Yeah,
Whoa,
exactly.
really?
Transmasculine.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was pre-transition male to female. That's interesting.
No. Yeah. And so he's just there. He's still wearing skirts. He's a gender non-conforming guy, but he's a guy nonetheless. It's real cool to like
Interesting.
show that
I
as
didn't
a
know
trans
that. That's
person
really
you can
neat.
still.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that either.
Yeah.
So
I already appreciated that character, but now I appreciate them more. Thank you for that. I have a good example that actually got a lot of buzz on.
Of course. How could I forget? Probably because I blocked it out of my memory.
Lily from Zombieland. Lily is trans, people. She is trans. It is just we don't need to go into why. It's people who are not trans just don't say some of the things that Lily said. That just doesn't happen. Okay?
Yeah.
Something interesting about the whole Lily situation, just because of like the online political climate that exists, it made me wonder what the reaction and discourse would be if Wandering Sun were to air today, as opposed to back when it aired. I'm horrified, frankly, by the thoughts of what the Twitter wars would be surrounding that series in our current year, 2018.
Yeah, especially if the manga wasn't finished yet or anything. Oh boy.
I'm almost morbidly curious of what sort of mental acrobatics they would have had to have done to try and deny Wandering Sun.
They'd find a way to do it.
I guess so. Speaking of Wandering Sun, something that I didn't know about until I watched your video on it was Mako. I thought Mako was a representation of a gay male, but from what you said, from the manga as well as your reading in the of the anime by itself as well, it was very enlightening to see. Oh, that was kind of like a trans girl representation that was not idealized or not like fantasy. Like this is going to be okay. I guess I'm probably misquoting a little bit there, but
no, yeah, that's
I mean.
the general idea. I certainly think like just taking the anime as a text on its own, reading Mako as a gay guy would still be like a fair reading of what you're presented there, because there isn't like so much indicating that they're necessarily a trans girl.
Right. The only clue is that she does say that she is attracted to the male teacher. That's literally all we have to go off.
I thought I remember Mako being like that Mako wasn't sure if they were trans or not, or if they were just interested in men, if that was like the source of it or not.
Yeah.
So yeah. I guess I don't remember if that was manga or anime, since I mostly just read the manga because I was too impatient for that.
She does say that in the anime, so it would probably be both. Yeah.
The other sort of hint towards transness in the anime is the fact that she too is concerned about aging and preserving her voice, and so she's the one who recommends that she and Shu do that recording of their voices on the phone, so that they always have their prepubescent voices, like for posterity's sake.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say also about Wandering Sun is I actually kind of have a lot of issues with it in like as a piece of like a story or whatever, but watching your video on it made me kind of appreciate it more, like because it's got a huge cast of characters I don't really like, but your video kind of made me see it differently a little. Not like I like it more necessarily, but I was like, I can kind of appreciate what the characters all do for the trans experience.
I'll agree with you that some of the characters in the show are super unlikable, but I think that's very intentional.
Yeah.
I certainly understand finding the affair pretty abrasive. That's more than fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, did we want to move on to another category at this point?
We should kind of like talk about conclusions kind of on this for a second real quick before we start moving on to the next category. Just sort of final thoughts of what we can kind of take away from what shows do good and bad to see how shows might represent better in the future and kind of the direction that we think the media might be going on that front.
Yeah, I certainly think that Lily is a nice ray of hope in that regard. Because she might just be like the best outright instance of trans rap. Like obviously Wandering Sun is really good too and would compete, but she's just like another character. It's not about transness even, so that transness is more incidental and just like an element of who she is. I mean, Symphogear has something similar. Nanoha, one of the side characters, is trans, so it's not like unprecedented or anything. But to sort of feature it so prominently narratively, obviously, just like here in the West, in Japan, awareness of trans people is increasing, as is the push to grant more and more rights and respect to them. And with that, you'll have just more people in the anime industry who share those sentiments and who are going to imbue the work they put out with those sentiments. And so I'm certainly pretty hopeful in that regard. There's some sort of ingrained archetypes and tropes that will serve as impediments to progress in certain regards. But I don't think they are ones that cannot be overcome. So.
Nice. I think something that hasn't been brought up in this section yet was kind of teased during the culture section. There's a lot of conflation of transgenderism with homosexuality, and that honestly needs to stop.
Yeah,
it does. You see it in a lot of what was mentioned of just kind of the comedic, the offensively comedic interpretations of trans people that are played off as jokes, and a lot of times it's kind of ambiguous whether they're gay guys in dresses or trans people, and that's kind of the problem in and of itself, that it's conflating those. So the less of that, the better.
That's
right.
I mean, I had someone in my comment section the other day saying that asexuality was a gender. So like,
I remember seeing that.
Just like keep cis straight people away from like thinking about it. It hurts their brains clearly, and they don't get it.
I think being generous, maybe they like had two ideas they were trying to say, because they said like 3-4 genders or whatever.
No.
So maybe they were trying to like say two different things and then like
they were
deleted
clearly
part
like
of it.
well intentioned to a degree.
But that's like the most generous kind of
interpretation of that.
Yeah.
Woo!
So yeah, with on that note, do we want to transition into gay male representation with Crispy?
Absolutely.
Woo! Let's get with the gay bros. Right. Okay, so I guess I'm assuming we're following the same format of good gay boy stuff, bad gay boy stuff.
Assuming that works for you.
Yes, it does. I can make it work. As pedantic romantic not so subtly clued in earlier, gay men, at least in this sphere of media in anime, tend to get shafted really hard, and I don't mean the good shafted. So thinking of good representations pretty much always comes with an asterisk. My favorite example, and I'll go more into this in the bad examples, but there's a little bit of good in Banana Fish. I do think there was some really, really sweet stuff with Ash and AG.
My boys.
It was super obvious they loved each other. There was someone on Facebook that was like, they're not, and these people just keep thinking they are. And I'm like, honey, this is like 30 years old, and the author has like very much confirmed it, and like we don't need to do this right now. There was some sweet stuff, and it was nice to see it as kind of, even if the story diegetically wasn't about the homosexual relationship, it was very much a character motivation for Ash, especially. And that was kind of nice. That's the good stuff I have to say about Banana Fish. Stay tuned. I'll be back.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I just want to say that I'm obviously not a gay man, but I think Banana Fish was a good anime, and that the good parts of it with Ash and AG outweigh the bad stuff that we're going to talk about later. Even though I don't think you think that, Crispy, if I remember right.
I very, very much disagree, but I respect your opinion.
Yeah.
The epilogue definitely helps. The manga has an epilogue that gives a lot of really good closure, and confirms that Ash and AG were in love with each other in that way. Yes, please stop denying it. As well as kind of hinting at another narrative thread that doesn't happen, obviously, because it ends. But the epilogue definitely helps in the manga. In terms of the anime, well, unless they make an OVA for it, the anime doesn't have that. So that's just another tick on it. But we'll be back to Banana Fish. Oh yes, we will. Other good representations, another good example of a show that it's technically not about the homosexual relationship, but it has one, is Number 6. And Number 6 is not a good show. It is a very not well-made sci-fi show that has some interesting twists at the end, especially in the anime, which from what I've read is anime original. Don't know how much better it made it, but I did like the relationship for the most part. I was disappointed it had the sad ending where they split up at the end I don't know why. I very much thought very long and hard about why they went their separate ways at the end, like thematically, and like what were they trying to say, and it's just a muddled mess. They never actually like and they kiss once, don't they? I watched this like a month ago and I don't remember.
Googling Number 6,
Okay.
The first Google complete result is Number 6 anime kiss, so I'm guessing they kiss.
They do kiss, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought
There's probably
they did.
like one scene that people like are looking for, you know?
That was okay. Thank you for confirming. That just showed how forgettable that show is. I watched it a month ago, and I remember more about Oron from this past summer. So I think another really good point from Number 6, Jack was rewatching a little bit of it as I was watching it, and we talked a little bit about how abusive Nezumi is towards Shion. Those are the two male leads, if you haven't watched the show. And I thought that was an interesting point, but having watched the whole show, it definitely did not condone that, which was nice. And Shion very, very much... I think it's like the third or fourth to last episode, like the big bonding moment between the two of them is him coming out and basically like, stop treating me like shit. I want to help. I want to do things.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
I'm here for you. Yeah.
I was gonna say something about that, just kind of like that I didn't think it was super great because it's not really the relationship itself. Like what I remember seeing of it was... It wasn't really a great relationship between the two of them to begin with. Right. So.
And it wasn't. You're 100% right. It was not a good relationship at the beginning, but it's thankfully the author uses that as a conflict that gets resolved and makes them stronger. So
that's good to hear.
Ooh, bullet dodged there. So two other properties I want to mention for positive representation. This first one is probably the one you've been expecting me to say. Yuri on Ice.
Yeah, you're nice. Sorry,
Yes.
I just had to. I was like waiting for it. Yeah.
Yes, it's a little vague, a little too vague sometimes. Yes, the ending was super ambiguous until they did the duet, which was amazing. Thankfully, we're getting a movie, so they can just keep doing it, please. Otherwise, it was super sweet. Another example of the story wasn't about that, but it had that, and it was really good. Yuri on Ice is a good example. Dokusei.
Yeah, this is the one I was waiting for. Yeah.
This is the one. This is the one that the critics out there were waiting for. Dokusei is a great movie. This one is very, very much about the gay relationship, which is definitely a very unique thing in this regards, at least in terms of positive representation. I think there was one thing that was bugging me after Jack and or some other people on another server brought up about the way they handled the teacher wasn't great. I didn't end up getting to rewatch it, but still just going off that, I think it was used well as a narrative obstacle for the couple. Yeah. And I think that really explored a lot of really good parts about being gay and a lot of the different emotions that come into that, especially with what was his name? Sajo, the short hair glasses lead who had known for longer that he was gay and was really struggling with a lot of the baggage that comes with that. Whereas Kusakabe was just totally freewheeling, like, yeah, dude, I love you. Yeah, dude, let's I want to be with you forever. Like, what's the matter? It was great.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that I think it was pretty good because even though it was like about kind of the gay, it wasn't necessarily about like being gay. It was about the romance, like because there's a lot of stuff that's kind of like focuses on like the issues of being gay. Like that's not something I'm interested in seeing as much because like I don't know. I mean, I'm not like I've lived that for the like lesbian side, so I don't really want to see that. So even though it was like about being gay, it was more about like the gay romance than like
it was kind of all of it. Yeah,
it was kind of all of it, but it wasn't just that. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah.
I don't know. I would say it was pretty solidly about being a gay man in Japan.
Maybe I probably didn't pick up on that as much because I'm not a gay man. So, but
yeah, and I don't want to take away from that because I think a big thing you notice of the four I mentioned, that's the one where it really is about being a gay man in a gay male relationship, and I think good representation of that is sorely missing. There's nothing wrong, and there's a lot of really great work that goes into putting these types of romances, or romances of any kind really, into stories that are not about romance. But I think, especially just having seen Bloom Into You this season, just having watched Wandering Sun, gay men don't really have a Wandering Sun. We don't really have a Bloom Into You. Dokusei, I guess, is the closest, but we only got one movie, and it didn't even adapt the entire series.
That's a good point.
I would, I'm not pushing for making all gay male representation stories about being gay, but I think that there is a huge vacuum there.
Yeah.
To that point, I don't want to take that away from Dokusei.
Yeah. I guess I'm kind of coming from the perspective of there's a lot of like Yuri works that are like all about being gay, so it's like it's kind of the opposite in that sense, like of what you.
Yeah, no, I get that. It can get to a point of too much, and to the point of that you start to denormalize it, which is a super tricky balance because there are stories to tell and emotions to portray, especially if we want cisgendered straight people to understand us, that we need to convey these emotions and these struggles. But I also get that balance of not wanting to push it too hard. Yeah, I get that. So I think that's a great transition to bad gay male representation. And the first the first one I want to hit is still part of a transition because I brought it up before. Banana fish. Oh boy. So first off, regarding the main couple, there's supposed to be a spoiler warning at the beginning of this episode. If Becker forgot it, I'm gonna say it now.
It's gonna be here.
Yeah, spoiler warning for banana fish. You've been warned once, now twice. Okay, Ash dies, and first off, just from I thought the story in Banana Fish was just laughably bad after the first half. In general, I laughed out loud when Ash got stabbed because of how.
Oh no!
Oh my god, you're heartless.
It was so goofy and seemingly came out of nowhere. And looking back on it, I'm like, I kind of get what they were doing thematically and with the character, but man, did they faceplant the execution.
I remember reading something in another server I'm in about how, like, in the manga it made more sense, because the manga has more context and time, because it's like, what is it, 23 volumes to 24 episodes or something?
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously the anime probably didn't do it as great for you, even if I enjoyed it without having read the manga, but...
I mean, I feel like Ash dying at that point is super contradictory to the whole arc the character was going through anyway, with how it was. It was kind of. I mean, I guess it was ironic that he finally accepts that he could be the person AG sees that he can be, and once he finally realizes it and goes to
when he drops his guard and like lets those vulnerabilities show, that's when he finally gets
So
that's like it's like I feel like that's like a good tragic that like I dig it.
No, I think Banana Fish
why do the gay characters always die?
Yeah, I know that's the part that kind of makes me like that's not super great, but then on the other hand, the part of me that like eats that kind of stuff up is like, yeah.
So it's sort of a question of like something that might be solidly dramatic but could have unintended meta-narrative consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Like
no, exactly. Like Banana Fish, for me at least, was like a really executed sort of classical tragedy. It was affecting. It was gripping, even if motivations got a little goofy. It was good. But like the fact that in being a tragedy, it falls into bury your gays, which is like a unfortunate specter that hangs over all these series. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, it's so old. It kind of makes me think
it does show its age.
It might have been better if it stayed as a manga.
I kind of wish, based on what you guys said, that I had read it as a manga, but I guess that's kind of ruined now.
Well, I plan on reading the manga eventually, so I'll let you know what I think.
Oh, I thought you already read it.
Nope.
Rip.
I just know people who have. So.
Okay. I would say another big problem, another big trope, specifically that Banana Fish falls into, and very much part of showing its age, is the I'm gonna show I'm a villain by gay raping someone.
I actually kind of forgot about that, to be honest.
Oh no!
We're on some SpongeBob level of Evir. Every villain is rapist. It just you lose so much goodwill when every single
every
single one rapes. Ash gets raped like 4 or 5 times in 24 episodes. That's insane.
Ash is just so irresistible. Ash
is
just the most attractive man to ever exist.
It's so not only. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. First off, it desensitizes rape when it's just used that much and for such a shallow purpose. Second off, the stereotype that gay men are overly aggressive, and you could even take Ash's under minor age as pedophilia, the whole pedophilia stereotype as well. It just stop pushing stuff like that. That's a pretty big bad thing. I mean, even really, really good series like Hunter x Hunter even have, like, Hisoka is shown as gay, and that's part of what villainizes him, and that I hate pointing that out.
I feel like I don't know. I kind of want to argue that
For Hisoka, I think it's a little more vague, but that's the one little, because I love Hisoka's character otherwise. I love Hunter x Hunter. I do want to put that out there, that I'm not just someone who hates the show, but that part was just so uncomfortable, and it's just, why are you using that as part of, like, why he's crazy, and being gay is not a mental illness.
Yeah, I feel like that's not quite what it's going for as much as, like, the predatory parts, but then it kind of gets conflated with the two a little, and it's kind of, yeah. But, I don't know, I'm thinking of one thing in the manga that I don't even know if it was, like, a correct translation or not. I won't spoil it, but it's kind of, like, weird.
Even what you were saying there with predatory, it goes in the whole stereotype that gay men are overly sexually aggressive. Which is not okay. There was a huge argument I got into on the official r/anime server about Inuyashiki after, I think it was episode 4 or 5, the one-off villain in the episode just makes a dude blow him.
Oh yeah, the rapey episode.
Yeah, again, you're just using it to show he's bad, and that's so...
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously bad in any context, but, like, yeah.
I think on the one hand, it can be argued that it's not necessarily the gay that's bad, but, like, the forcing sexual, because in that same episode with Inuyashiki, doesn't he, like, force a girl to do something similar or something?
Yeah, so, they're both bad.
So
it's not mutually exclusive.
I definitely see where you're coming from, and I'm not, like, trying to argue with you exactly, but I think it's more than just, oh, he's gay, he's bad.
Well, okay, so it's what you're saying, the whole sexual assault rape is bad. Using it as a way to show a villain is bad is shallow and does not match the severity of the act. That's the foundation. The fact that he does it to another dude is just another little cherry on top there.
Right, and it's also a question of frequency more than it is anything else, right? If you had perfect representation, these things wouldn't be bad in microcosm. But the fact that this is how you frequently see these people represented when it becomes something problematic. So an individual show, like, for example, Hunter x Hunter, I'm sure had no bad intent to it, right? Like,
right. I think that's fair.
Like, it even has Hunter x Hunter actually in its own right has some sort of weirdly nuanced representation as far as, like, Alika goes.
Yeah,
and,
no.
like,
oh yeah,
I missed out on her.
We should have mentioned that earlier. Actually, that was. But anyway, but yeah, I don't think Hisoka, like, is a bad thing necessarily on his own. More is something that's, like, emblematic of kind of a larger issue that makes certain narrative choices problematic, just for the fact that a lot of other people are also making those narrative choices.
No, that's exactly true. Like, with Banana Fish's ending, it wouldn't necessarily be bad to just have this tragedy about a gay couple. If the fact that bury your gays wasn't a thing, and that gay couples are so often forcibly parted by death, and that's what sort of makes that ending sting as much as it does.
Right, and so you can have things that work as good story elements in themselves that are problematic in a way that's not even inherent to the work itself. Like, I think Hisoka is a fantastic example of that, because I think Hisoka is a good, entertaining character in a lot of ways. And so taking Hunter x Hunter on its own, Hisoka's fine, but you can definitely bring him up as especially with the at the very least predatory hintings in the character, bring him up as an example of someone who is simultaneously, like, coded towards being potentially gay and also potentially pedophilic, even if that's not necessarily even there. It's still emblematic of something that does exist in fiction.
Yeah, and there's the whole thing about it. You guys have gotten to this of intention versus impact. Right. A lot of this, when there is a larger contextual issue like this, there are instances like Hisoka that are more an example of an author not intending it to come across this way, but because of the culture and the attitude that exists, it impacts that way.
Right.
It's taken that way. And I think it's important, calling all this out is not necessarily a way to like punish or demonize these authors and writers who do this stuff. Not inherently, at least. There may be some of that for specific examples, but it's always important to point out and discuss instances like this that have that impact, because then it can show those authors, show those creators what is wrong with the current climate, with the attitude, so the ones who have the good intentions can fix it.
Right. And so that's why there should be a lot of clarity here, where there are some things that are just intentionally and kind of soullessly doing bad representation. But for the most part, bad representation doesn't mean piece of media bad. It means it comes from a culture with bad representation. And it should just be pointed out.
Yeah, I have Hunter x Hunter at a 10, but I'm still I'm still gonna point out that the moment in the Heaven's Arena arc with Hisoka where it's like, wow, that was a little oof. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I then want to wrap up with the last part of bad gay male representation, with yaoi, just the whole. I don't know if I want to call out that tag specifically, but the whole overly fetishized, unrealistic, ridiculous, sometimes rapey, boys love and yaoi stuff that gets put out there. Okay, let me gather my thoughts. So first off, there's the rapey part of it, which we've gone through this. Sexually aggressive gay men is bad stereotype. Something like Dakaichi is ridiculously rapey, regardless of if it's two men or a man and women or two women. That kind of stuff's not okay.
For those of you who don't know, the English title to that series is "The Sexiest Man in the World is Harassing Me." Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
God.
And it's like,
it's yikes.
yeah, I watched the first episode to prepare for this podcast.
Yeah, just the title sounds
It was
like the
so
most yikes.
rapey. Like, it was
super
like,
rapey.
I remember one point, the one guy is like running away from the others. He's trying to like rape him or whatever. Like, maybe not like full on rape, but like.
Dude, they have the assaulter like do the little crawl over the wall as the Titan from Attack on Titan in one episode.
God.
I was just like,
This is the perfect way to code our gay male character. No flaws here.
Yikes! Yeah.
There's like, I don't know, if you want like sexy gay guys getting it on, why rape?
Yeah.
You know, it's like there are better ways to fill that sexual need than to
and I don't necessarily want to kink shame, but when a lot of the representation for a group of marginalized people, gay men for example, is a over-sexualized version of them written for straight women, there's a problem. I think, again, this is something that, well, okay, the rapey stuff's always going to be bad. Moving to just the overly sexualized, unrealistic stuff like Yaruchin Bitch Boo and Hitori Jime My Hero. Oh, that also had an age gap that was problematic. Fun.
I haven't seen Bitch Boo, but
student teacher.
I know some people who like it, but I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to comment on it, but
there's a problem when that's like your main representation, because then it gives people the wrong idea of who gay men actually are. There's a lot of overly flamboyant characters in that are played off as jokes. In Yaruchin Bitch Boo, there's a character who is literally so flamboyant and promiscuous. They're basically just a arm-waving, mentally handicapped person. I don't know how else to put it. The character can't speak. It's like yes, I'm not kidding. It's like they play off the promiscuous gay dude as just like some stupid low IQ bimbo. It's just like
That sounds really funny, and like it might actually, like, if you're into that, it probably does its work as a hentai OVA for you.
Okay.
But at the same time, where's all the good, wholesome gay hentai, you know?
This is, I mean, even outside of hentai, this is what I was talking about when I was
not
talking
a hentai?
about.
I thought you said it had semen in it.
No, it's a hentai. That's not what I was saying. I'm trying to bring the conversation to.
Trying to evade demonetization here.
No, we're already screwed.
It's back to what I was talking about with Dokusei being finally something that's actually a story about gay men. It was something I said earlier. I wanted to come back to. Stories about being gay are sorely lacking in good representation. I said that very specifically because there are plenty of these types of stories like Hitorijime and Yarachin's, I guess, more hentai, or Dakaichi that are about being gay or about gay romances, but they get it so wrong. So I want to put that out there. When I say I want more stories about gay men being gay men, I don't mean stuff like that. Okay, I think that's all I have to say.
Okay. Oh, it's my turn now, I guess. Wait, or are we going to wrap up?
I can wrap up.
Yeah, just like final notes on where you think things might be going and how we can make things better.
I think it's getting better. I think gay men in anime and manga specifically are starting at a disadvantage to begin with. But it's slowly getting better. I think there are studios like MAPPA and people like Sayo Yamamoto and the director of Banana Fish who have the best of intentions, who want to push this type of representation and make it better. I feel like they are very, very much at the beginning, though.
Right. Well, I think Yuri on Ice was huge because that was mainstream, right?
It was. That Yuri on Ice was a huge step. Banana Fish could have been the huge next step. It didn't quite make it, but that's okay. Keep trying. I think what that director did with Free as well was really emblematic of kind of showing off, the male physique, kind of how the female physique is overly shown off in anime, and trying to balance the scales there. I think there are people with great intentions. I want to see what Studio Grizzly would do if they made not a hentai. It seems they have. I'm very curious if their intentions in forming that studio are, we're going to make a bunch of hentai and BL that's bad, that's problematic, or we actually want to push this stuff and this is just us making money.
What if they did wholesome hentai though? What about that? Would that be good or bad?
Is that
like
even
it was
hentai,
like non-rapey BL hentai.
I'm gonna abstain from commenting on that for now.
Okay.
And it's Ridley.
I don't want to comment on that right now.
Okay.
But I think there's some promise. There's some promise. We're very far off. We need to stop showing gay men as villains and stop, gay or not, stop using rape as a way to show a person is evil. That's
flashbacks to the beginning of the season.
Way too shallow a reason to use that for the severity of the act.
Grizzly, was that the Studio Mappa subsidiary, like sub-studio thing they formed?
They think it spun off from Mappa. I've never seen confirmation. There was the article that Sakagabura did when they formed along with Durian and when Cloverworks renamed themselves before they spun off. Where they were like, there's like some hint that Grizzly is maybe a shoot off of Mappa, but I don't think that's ever been confirmed. It would be interesting because if it is, that means some of those same people might move there and start making some of the good types of stories there.
Exactly.
Which would be great.
Post Yuri on Ice, there's clearly a sort of recognition of how lucrative these gay stories can be. That's probably factored into the decision to adapt the legacy gay manga Banana Fish.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
So if they sort of recognize that, strong, solid rap like Yuri on Ice is something that specifically the massive buying power of the female otaku market wields.
Yeah, they actually buy Blu-rays and stuff.
Yeah.
Yuri
I remember
on Ice
seeing
sold
numbers. It's like for instance, like Idolish 7 is one of the best-selling Blu-rays of right now, I think.
Yeah.
Didn't Yuri on Ice's first volume alone sell over 60,000 copies?
Yeah, it was
like that's a number that's like really good if your entire series and all of their volumes collectively hit that. Its first volume hit that. That's insane.
Yeah.
So
that's sort of a double-edged sword in that perhaps the sort of large base of women buying this stuff are sort of fueling works featuring gay males that sort of cater to their idealized perceptions, and you're getting more dakaichis.
You read my mind.
And less genuine rep because of that. So yeah, we'll sort of have to see how that works out.
I think even as you move forward, like soulless copies are almost inevitable as people realize that something is profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably are going to see a lot of bad stuff intermixed with more good stuff coming in.
Yeah. I hopefully it'll be worth it.
I just want to say that, like, not all Fujoshi are want the bad stuff. Like, there's a lot that want the good stuff, too, you know?
They're overly demonized.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's always the lowest common denominator in any kind of fan circle.
Right.
Oh, of course. I don't want to demonize
I didn't want to, like,
no.
even say that you were. I just kind of wanted to clarify that.
No, that's a good thing to throw out there for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so I kind of structured mine a little differently because there's a lot of lesbian anime and stuff, so it's hard to kind of go in just good and just bad. So I have 3 main sections: sexy lesbians, fluffy lesbians, and lesbians as ... people ? Okay, so the first one is for sexy lesbians is Citrus and NTR, as I'm sure this podcast knows about Citrus.
Oh boy.
But yes, basically sexy lesbians is lesbians that is about the girls making out, almost having sex, or actually having sex, and often features sexual assault, kind of like the bad yaoi that Crispy was talking about. And I just want to say that, like, while it often comes off as if it's lesbians written by men for men, that's not necessarily always the case, as a lot of works are actually written by women. Like, I want to say either Citrus or NTR, the author is actually a woman. I'll have to double check.
Citrus's mangaka is definitely a woman. I don't know about NTR. It might be as well.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's not just, the men are sexualizing lesbians. It's kind of also lesbians kind of carving out their own space in that sphere.
Do you think part of it might be some sort of, like, internalized prejudice then? That they're writing things like this that are so problematic about their own group?
I feel like that would be presumptuous of me to, like, say outright. But there's so much sexual assault. Just, is it okay, even if, like, no matter what group you're in, I think. But that said, Citrus is pretty sexy, except for the sexual assault. It's got really good art.
It does.
And, like, if you just, like, ignore the context of, like, the sexual assault happening, it's pretty good at doing what it set out to do. So, yeah. But then there's stuff like NTR that I hate it. I hate it.
I watched the first episode of that, and I turned my TV off and went to bed after that.
Yeah, I started watching it when I was first kind of getting into seasonal anime. Like, I didn't know what NTR was in general, so I'm like, oh, lesbian anime, they're dating. And I'm like, it took me like 7 episodes to walk away from it and find something better to watch.
Oh, no.
But yeah, but that said, there's one sexy lesbian show that I think is actually really good, genuinely. And I'll touch on this more later since it kind of relates to my last category, but Cutie Honey. That is definitely sexy, and that is definitely gay, but it is not really anything like Citrus or NTR.
That's interesting. I remember watching this thinking, I mean, obviously from the perspective of someone who's not a lesbian, and not a woman either, that wow, there's some really interesting stuff and there's some really problematic stuff.
Yeah, Cutie Honey in general, like, oh my god.
Go Nagai in general, really.
Yeah.
So like, not all of Cutie Honey is great, but I personally really enjoyed Cutie Honey and thought that
that's fair.
Was very good at being sexy while also being empowering and not rapey. Well, mostly not rapey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Imaishi and Ano like really got that, and the dude who directed the second episode just didn't.
I don't remember specifics enough of that. Like, I remember you mentioning that when I was watching it, but I don't remember noticing it.
It was funny. Episode 2 was the one where I thought had some problematic stuff, whereas episodes 1 and 3 seemed to balance that as better. So that's part of why I rated it slightly lower, but it's good to hear that there is some good stuff in there.
But yeah, I'll bring it back up again later when we get into, because it's the gay part of it. The romance part of it is like very much incidental kind of to the rest of the plot, so we can talk about that a little more later. But I just wanted to bring that up as a sexy lesbian show that I think actually is good.
Nice.
Like, without any asterisks or anything. Okay. Anyways, does anybody else have any thoughts on that, I guess?
No, I think you did a good job covering it.
And then now we have the fluffy lesbians, where it's kind of like cute girls doing cute things. Moa, often Yuri bait. You know, and then the good one of my favorites is Kaze-san and Morning Glories, or Asagao to Kaze-san.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, and it's like super fluffy and positive, and I appreciate how it's like, it's really fluffy, but it also feels like it takes their romance seriously. Like, it's not just, oh, but we're girls, we can't do this. Oh, I'll be in a relationship with a man later, so this is just practice. So it doesn't really do that. Like, I feel like some kind of fluffy Yuri does.
That would be a good example of a good story about being lesbian. Like I was talking about, with stories about being gay. So that's, I agree. Asagao to Kaze-san was a home run.
Yeah. And the anime, unfortunately, does not adapt the entire manga, but the manga's really good.
Rip.
So,
God, Kase is like the hottest woman alive. She's so good. In the latest chapter, she's in a suit. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Although I think the latest chapter of it, the Yamada to Kaze-san, there was kind of a thing, like the drama was kind of eye roll.
Yeah.
But it wasn't bad because of how it was portraying their relationship. Because their relationship has always been portrayed very well. And I think the author for it is actually a guy. So it kind of proves that, Kaze-san.
It doesn't matter who was creating it necessarily. Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of like, you can't just say, oh, Yuri created by men is bad, you know, or like, even though sometimes I feel that, I feel just want to like throw my hands up and be like, I'm done with Yuri, bye guys. But then other times it's like, well, I mean, that's not all it is.
Okay, so if creator doesn't entirely matter, here's a kind of second question to go along with that. Do you feel like intended
it looks like
audience
it's a woman, actually. Sorry to jump in.
Oh.
Takashima Hiromi, the mangaka for Kase-san.
Oh.
Yeah, the picture I'm looking at
Is a
for
drawing.
Twitter. It's a drawing, but there's like, it looks like a guy and there's stubble, it looks like, maybe.
Yeah. On
So-
manga updates, they're listed as a woman.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Interesting.
The picture of them.
The
okay.
thing definitely has some
Maybe.
stubble, but
Huh, interesting. I didn't realize that.
Huh.
Anyway, what I wanted to ask, just kind of like bouncing off that, is if you felt like target audience matters more, or if that even that necessarily doesn't matter.
It only matters when I can dunk on it if it's done poorly.
yeah.
right.
So
So,
it's about
it's
execution.
more about quality of execution and whether attention was
Yeah.
paid. Right.
Because there can be good from both, but I want to say, well, I feel like it's rarer for like the female demographic Yuri to be done in a way I don't like as much as it's. But then again, that may also be just there's less Yuri in shoujo or josei genre in general.
Right.
That's exactly it. The problem with the demographics in both Yuri and Yaoi right now is not the existence of work made for those demographics, but the quantity and how much it overshadows gay stories written for gay people.
Right. That makes sense.
I think Yuri, especially relative to Yaoi, is interesting in that it's got a much stronger female presence than Yaoi and Boys Love Works have a male presence.
Oh, we gave up on Yaoi. We have Bada.
Yeah, no, exactly. But for example, like the statistics from Yuri Hime, which is one of the big Yuri magazines, they had a majority female readership right up until, what was it, like Yuyushiki or Yuru Yuri, one of those big Yuri that has more of like a sexy appeal. That got an anime and brought in a bunch of like the male viewers of the anime, and after that it was like 54% male readership for a while in the manga. Or like Zaria, my girlfriend, she's a YouTuber who focuses on Yuri works a lot of the time, and her demographics are like skew way female, like 70% women on lots of her Yuri videos, which is rare for anime and manga videos. Usually those skew fairly male. And so it's interesting just how significant a force within the audience for Yuri works women are. Not necessarily queer women, all of them, to be sure. Sometimes they're in it just for like the shoujo style romance that lots of straight women like, be they straight romances or queer romances. But it's definitely got a gender parity there that's interesting to think about.
It may also be that straight women don't necessarily feel threatened by reading gay works of their own gender, while you're more likely to kind of, like, a male anime fan might be more likely to be like, oh no, I don't like that gay shit, like, more kind of opposed to it in principle.
I mean, as we went over, women in Japan are just, like, in an overall demographic sense, a little more accepting of homosexuality generally than Japanese men.
But yeah, like, there's definitely still women that are homophobic, but I feel like you just don't see as the same kind of pushback as you from women as a whole towards gay works of their own gender versus guys the same way.
And if you think about, like, some of the most successful and large Yuri works, most of them are written by women, as opposed to something like Boys Love and Yaoi, where men are not writing a lot of the biggest series there. So that's maybe a sort of contributing reason to why Yuri, in a lot of regards, is better off rep-wise. Just that there's women, and some of them explicitly queer. For example, what's her name? The artist for Pandora and the Crimson Shell is an out lesbian, and she's dating another mangaka.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't even know that.
Morishima Akiko. She did the Yurikuma Arashi manga as well.
Oh.
So you sort of get stories about queer women from women at the very least, which helps, and from, in many cases, queer women. Yeah.
Okay. And then to follow up the fluffy lesbians is Yuru Yuri. Something that I enjoy as a comedy, but I kind of hate it as a Yuri. Like, it just feels like it's always, to me, it feels like it doesn't really take being gay seriously. It's like, oh, haha, it's funny, she likes another girl, haha. But then again, like, obviously, like, I'm not the only lesbian in the world, so I'm sure there are probably lesbians who enjoy it and like it. But I don't know.
Right, but like the kind of playing for laughs can feel just sort of like minimizing at least, or
yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should have watched an episode of it before this. Like, I mean, I've seen it, all of it.
Right.
Rewatched to get.
Yeah, rewatched an episode, but yeah. So it's like, it's kind of, it feels like, I guess it's not really bait in that they do have romantic feelings, and that's kind of clear. But at the same time, like, what it does with the relationships, it generally does feel like bait. It's kind of like, because it's like a comedy, it's like everything is, like, it's kind of this comedy where it's like, at the end of the day, everything goes back to normal so they can, like, set the stage as, like, regular like it is for the next skit.
Yeah, so comedy is so hard when you deal with these sorts of topics. Because, comedies don't take a lot of things seriously, but there are plenty of comedies that are satires or dark comedies that do take a lot of things seriously, and it's just striking that balance of having the representation in a comedy but not taking it seriously or taking it seriously as it should is very interesting. Just kind of shows the complexity of representation for groups like this.
Mm-hmm. And then, if we kind of want to move on to my last section, Lesbians as People, because I didn't really know how to think of it, because what we talked about before was kind of focused on the relationship between two women, whereas this section, I feel like we talk more about portrayals of lesbians as individuals instead of as part of a pairing. Like, like Aoi Hana, for instance, by the same author as Wandering Sun.
Mm-hmm.
I related hard to that. It was, like, really real.
Yeah.
And it was very good, even if it kind of felt kind of like tragedy bait, or not tragedy, but kind of like sad. Like, it wasn't super happy all the time, and bad stuff happened, but at the same time, it felt really real to me. So I thought overall it's pretty good, but I don't know if I'd want to reread it. Yeah. Okay. And then also Bloom Into You, which is airing soon.
Yeah.
Right, which
really
I
good.
started. I've really enjoyed it so far.
It's really good.
I finished it today, yes.
I haven't finished it yet, but I've read all the manga for it. I've even reread the manga, so it's really good.
It's really good.
Yeah, like
I was disappointed by the anime ending, but I understand it's not a complete adaptation.
I mean, to be honest, there's no good stopping point in the manga. Like, even if it went up, it would have to, like, just finish the whole story with the manga in order to end at a good spot.
They are going in such a great direction, though, with the meta theater in the story.
Oh, that's so good.
It's so good. The changing the ending to the play was just like, yes.
Oh, that's so good. The manga is so good. Like, the anime is like a 9 out of 10 for me, but the manga is a 10 out of 10 because of the arcs that are happening later. It's so good.
I was between an 8 and a 9, and I gave it an 8 because it wasn't. I don't know. Like you said, there probably really isn't a good stopping point. I was a little disappointed, but I still thought it was great. One thing I really liked about Bloom Into You was not just the main relationship and not just Sayaka, but having the teacher and barista couple.
Right.
Yeah,
that's good. But like,
That was
there's like so much
amazing.
good lesbian representation because you got the main couple, and then you have Sayaka, who
Oh,
is
my
like,
poor girl.
it kind of like, I really like how it feels kind of like it's refuting the Class S tropes that we talked about earlier.
It's so
'cause it's
grounded.
Like, because
so
like she
grounded.
was like at an all-girls school, you know, and then she like experienced that, and it was like, but then her senpai or whatever was like, oh, that wasn't real or whatever, but she like did feel it was real, so it's kind of like she's moving away from Class S.
Yeah, it feels like a
into
very
reality.
explicit and directed sort of refutation of Class S there, to be sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not have thought of that on my own, but that makes perfect sense as sort of like a author nod to, hey, we're moving past this now, especially just given how solid the representation in the show itself is. Like, that's almost certainly intentional now that you bring it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the adult couple, especially just because it gives Sayaka specifically during the run of the anime, hopefully later on a role model for the other characters too, or for the other characters too, role models, showing that you can, you know, realistically be in a relationship like this, and that lesbians are just normal people that just happen to like same sex.
Yep.
It just, I thought that the scene with the barista and Sayaka at the cafe and all the shots of the reflection in the coffee and all, it was beautifully done. Beautiful.
I really like them too because, I don't know, because I think the barista lady, like at one point, like she was like thinking about like how she saw that Sayaka liked Toko. I was like, oh, she looks like she'd be hard to love or whatever, like hard to fall in love with. And I don't know, I can relate to that because, like, man, high school was a mess. Like, you sometimes in high school, you get crushes on girls that it's a clusterfuck, man.
Yeah, I feel that.
And so it's like, I like how the adults are kind of helping Sayaka maybe move on from Toko. Like, I don't know if it's really moving on as much as kind of
Understanding
helping her
feelings.
realize that Toko isn't like the only one out there, which because sometimes it feels like in like Yuri romance, it's like they're only for each other, you know. That's all.
No,
Well, that's I think a problem that plagues like almost any romance, not just
yeah,
Yuri in particular, but yeah.
Specifically
sure.
in Yuri works, though, the sort of trope is that like, oh, it's not that I'm like attracted to girls. It's just that like I'm attracted to you,
right?
Which like can be like cute and romantic when done right, but a lot of the time it's like undermines the queerness of the girl.
Or it's like, oh, it's like a coming out story too. So then it's like their first relationship is the main one that you want. But with Bloom into You with Sayaka, it's kind of like she's kind of learning to embrace her identity as a lesbian without necessarily having that identity be attached to her first real relationship other than the one that kind of got her started in the first place. It's kind of like she's learning to be a lesbian as a person instead of as part of a couple.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But yeah, I really like her, and because like I feel like the main couple, they're good, but there's kind of less to dig into with the specifically lesbian side. It's more kind of like character motivations and developments, and maybe
Toko's fucked up.
Yeah, oh, she is totally fucked up, and I love her for that.
Yeah,
but
she got some problems.
But yeah, it's kind of like it's more about the character, other parts of the characters, and with you, even like aromanticism, maybe.
No, exactly.
Question mark.
Gray
is she,
arrow.
Is she not? But so it's kind of less. There's less to dig into with the lesbian side of it.
She's definitely,
rather than the other characters.
Yeah, I would say she's definitely in denial of her sexuality. But you bring up you the term you used was perfect. She's definitely attracted to Toko and in denial of it. But is she aromantic?
Yeah,
I think
know.
like a demi-romantic or a gray arrow, something along that spectrum, would be possible. Obviously, I don't think she's like wholly aromantic in that I believe she is falling for Toko and will continue to do so.
I don't really read her as aromantic either, but
She may just be growing into her sexuality, but I like that the series is taking its time with developing that and going through that, because it is a complex issue. I mentioned I struggled with my sexuality. I came out as bisexual before coming out as gay. It's not, for some people know, and others just, it's a process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot to dig into with the main couple, but like I said, less kind of lesbian specific than Sayaka or even the barista and teacher couple. That I forget their names because I'm a really bad fan.
I know one of them
show.
is Miyako. I don't remember the other.
Yeah, I don't remember their names.
I just know them.
And I just watched the last episode, and they're in the episode.
But yeah, so Bloom and Tea is great. Aoihana is great. And then I wanted to mention again Re Cutie Honey, that I like it for this because it's action movie romance, except it's two women. It's like it's not really representing the gay experience at all, but it's representing just two women falling in love like it's the most natural thing in the world. Like, oh yeah, this is like, if it's like something you could find on like a weird alternate universe where everybody was gay and being straight was the minority.
Let me quickly mention that Zaria, my girlfriend, has a 40-minute, 45-minute, something like that, Bloom Into You video coming out in like 2 or 3 days.
Nice.
Awesome.
So look
Well,
forward
that
to
will be
that.
out probably by the time this is recorded, so we'll link to that or something.
Cool.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, or by the time this is released, I should say.
Oh, and then I also wanted to bring up Ikuhara again, the Utena director. He also directed Sailor Moon S, which is really great. And it came out before.
Didn't he direct like all the Sailor Moons from back then?
What?
Or did he just do S?
No,
he directed a few seasons.
He started with Sailor Moon R, the movie, and then Sailor Moon S. But the first 2 seasons of Sailor Moon are actually done by the director of Amanchu and Arya and Hakuto Precure.
Yeah, Junichi
So
Sato.
they kind of like shared it. Like they were each episode directors for each other's seasons too.
I knew he was heavily involved in Sailor Moon, yeah.
But yeah, Ikuhara did Sailor Moon S and I think Sailor Stars, maybe Super S, I'm not sure. But yeah. And Sailor Moon S is the one where you meet Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune. My 2 favorites, especially Sailor Uranus. I really like her a lot.
Creepiest cousins in the dub.
Oh no, no.
Yeah, the dub, original English dub, changed them to cousins because they were too familiar with each other because they're
powerful.
gay. But it just made it look incestuous instead. Like, there are some really funny lines. Like, I remember, there's just, like, you just, like, look up, like, funny moments from the dub, and it's really funny.
Jeez.
But yeah. So, Ikuhara also did Revolutionary Girl Utena, which is also an iconic gay work. Because, like, Utena, she's, like, engaged to the Rose Bride. That's cool. But yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, I got through episode 20 with the group watch another server's doing, and then I got super busy with holidays and had to drop out. But I have the Blu-rays for Revolutionary Girl Utena, the new Nozomi Entertainment releases that they just did the past year.
Big box set?
No, I got them individually because I won the first volume in a competition.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, so that was fun, but I paid for the other 2. I have both volumes of Penguin Drum, and I have Yuri Kuma Arashi. So I got all of the Ikuhara original stuff. So I'm gonna have to buy Sada Zanmai when that
so
comes out.
hyped for Sada Zanmai.
We didn't mention this with the looking forward for gay stuff, but I think Sada Zanmai is going to be a really good entry for gay male representation.
I hope so.
What show is this?
Sada Zanmai, Ikuhara's upcoming series.
It's coming in spring, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Probably.
So
I'm kind of stepping away from seasonals, but that's going to be one that I'll probably hop back in for.
So I'm really hopeful that he will do gay men and do it right. I mean, I'm pretty sure he will. Like, it's Ikuhara. I can't see him doing it wrong, but at the same time, it's kind of a little bit of a new territory for him, since he's mostly done Yuri or lesbian kind of relationships, if at all.
Right.
He seems like he has good intentions, though, so I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited. It'll be something to keep your eye on if you're interested in LGBT anime, for sure.
And it's also yet another Mappa series featuring
It
gays.
is, yeah. They really seem to be pushing that stuff, which is great. I think what's that studio? There's a studio co-producing it with Mappa, Lapin Films. I hadn't heard of them.
Lapin
before.
Track, I believe.
Lapin Track, thank you.
Yeah, they co-produced Mawaru Penguin Drum as well with Ikuhara.
Oh.
So they're like a studio he likes to work with. They do like graphic design and stuff. If you look at like the PVs, the same like graphic design style that was used for Mawaru Penguin Drum for like typography and stuff is used in this.
And for like the background characters.
Yeah. Oh, but they're like actually credited as a co-studio on this one. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not credited with anything else, it looks like. Just looking at their WoW. Let's see.
So they worked with Brains Base on Penguin Drum, but weren't quite credited.
Looks like it, yeah.
Interesting.
Cool. Well, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that since we were talking about Ikuhara.
Absolutely,
Mappa is
good.
woke as fuck.
I mean, Mappa gave us Lily too, right?
Yeah, exactly. They gave us.
Oh yeah, dang.
Damn.
That was good, but then they have some shows, and I'm like, no, like Kakagurui. Sorry, this isn't LGBT related, but it's like, no, not Kakagurui.
Mappa has an issue with production schedules too.
Oh, they produce so many shows at once. What are they doing?
It's so bad. Well, I think they have multiple internal studios, which helps-ish,
but
a bit.
Yeah.
But they apparently can't see. I mean, we've seen. Zombieland had that terrible CGI. Banana Fish fell apart. Yuri on Ice famously degraded over its episodes, even if it didn't quite fall apart. I remember I watched Garo Vanishing Line when that aired, and that looked great at first, and then it just completely tanked.
Oh, no.
Those poor animators, they just can't.
Can't catch a break.
Yikes.
Yeah. But yeah, that kind of. I think I hit most of my points on Yuri anime overview, but overall, I think it's going in a good direction, even if sometimes it feels like there's one step forward, like two steps forward, one step back sometimes with some shows.
There's just one other lesbian couple in anime that I would be remiss not to mention. Which is, of course, Nano Fate from the Nanoha series.
Oh, yeah, I still need to watch season 2 of that. But it's really good.
An epic,
apparently,
generation-spanning romance. We get to see them fall in love at, like, age 9. And by now in the series, they're middle-aged mothers. They've adopted a daughter together. Lesbian power moms.
Isn't Lyrical Nanoha like a really early Shinbo work? I've been meaning to...
Yeah, the first season was directed by Shimbo. I think that was right before he like joined up with Shaft.
He did his first series with Shaft in 2004, I believe, is when Moonface was done. And then he joined a couple years later when they were like, "We're gonna make you like our thing."
Yeah.
But I guess the takeaway is magical girls are great at being
They
gay.
are very good at being gay.
Like, even, like, not just with lesbians, like, Cardcaptor Sakura has some great not lesbian gays. And,
Yuki
Hugto
and,
Precure this
Hugto
season.
Precure Amidoodoo! Oh,
It's
I
got
love
some
them.
really great stuff with some of the side characters. Not any of, like,
No,
I guess
they're main characters. Yeah, they're cures.
main characters now. But then also the other one.
Oh, Henri and his boyfriend?
Yeah, and also kind of Henri's...
Ambiguous gender.
Yeah, it's kind of ambiguous again. But I feel like I'm kind of more willing to forgive it since it's like a kid's show and they're testing the water. Because it's like he's the first thing, so they're kind of like testing the waters.
No, like to go as far as it's gone is like remarkable in itself, and I'm not gonna fault it whatsoever.
Like Precure's like super mainstream. It's like
Yeah.
of the most watched, so it's like, but yeah, watch Precure. It's good. That's my shill for the podcast.
Please do.
My every time I go on the podcast, I shill watch hashtag Precure.
Also, watch other kids shows. I Caught Two Friends is also pretty dang gay between our leads, Aine and Mio. Kids anime are just really good, actually.
Kids shows in general. Sometimes it feels like kids shows in general are just better at this. So I know, not all the way, but it's like Steven Universe, not anime, but
Gegege no
good
Kitaro.
stuff.
Not on queer stuff specifically, but it is super woke on like labor exploitation, on Japanese historical revisionism. Like it goes everywhere, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like kids shows. Why are kids shows so good at this? And then like other shows.
Wasn't Mahojin Guru Guru also a kids show? That was really good.
I don't think it technically was. It's very like cartoony
it was
and
a
fun.
shonen.
Yeah.
It's from adapted from a shonen manga. But the remake was probably targeting older people with nostalgia.
That's fair.
So.
It was another fantastic series, though. You're right about that one.
Mahojin is great.
Criminally underwatched.
But yep, that's the state of the union of Yuri.
The state of the union.
Watch Hunto. All right.
All right, great. I think we're ready to kind of hit a concluding discussion now that we've kind of gone through.
Okay.
Gone through everyone's kind of opinions on representation. So does anyone have any kind of points they want to make at the end to sort of like unite everything that we've talked about, or anything else that didn't really like fit in necessarily?
I think this is just great to hear about, opinions on representation from people actually from those groups. I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like I understand better, like, what exactly gets at what's good representation for you guys, what's bad representation, and I hope I was able to clarify some things as well.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I felt like I learned a lot from this podcast. It was really fun being on. Like and it was kind of interesting learning more, because I felt like things like the Tokyo Godfather section, which was something which for me seemed like good representation, but I felt kind of like I had some trepidations bringing it up, because I was like, is this actually good representation from the perspective of someone who's actually trans? Because there are some things that like gave me a little bit of pause, and so getting those opinions and actually kind of seeing at how people within those groups actually feel about this different representation was really enlightening to me.
Mm-hmm. For me, when I was kind of putting together my thoughts, like to make sure I had something to talk about, I realized kind of how I thought about representation, that there's kind of two sides of it. The side that kind of represents what I have felt in the past, and also kind of represents what I want to be. Because on the one side, you've got my experiences as like a lesbian, awkward teenager struggling, and that's important and good to have. But for like me personally right now, what I'm more interested in seeing is the positive stuff that's like just two women casually going out, and saving the world,
Yeah.
So that's kind of the representation that I prefer to see now, I think, even though the other type of representation is also really important and good, but that's what I was just thinking about.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel like a lot of works about queer people end up sort of focusing on like portraying the struggle and like the dark, hard life these people lead. Sometimes like in a manner that provides like good representation and catharsis for people who've had these tough experiences, and sometimes in a manner that's just like fetishizing and providing cry porn for outsider audiences to like, wow, so emotional, these experiences.
And sometimes things can be both too. It's like it doesn't have to be one or the other. But yeah.
And as you said, I think having works where you just get to have like a pair of gay people be happy together and like have a good life is super valuable, because there's sort of less of a impetus a lot of the time to make that over the cry porny exploitative stuff.
Yeah. I think I want to say to the audience especially, I hope, regardless if you agree or not with us on our various individual points and stuff, I hope this was still valuable. I mean, the reason I initially suggested this to the mods of this podcast is to have a space, a moment, a time where people from this community can come together and just gush over anime and talk about our opinions and perspectives, partially to give us a space that we really don't have a lot of in this community, but also as a showcase to all of you out there who maybe haven't been exposed to these perspectives, these opinions. I hope, regardless if you agree or not right now, that you listened and that you learned something new, and that you take something away from this and have something to think about. So right. I think these types of discussions are so important if, we as the human race want to come together, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I do think that's really really what's cool about this podcast, and why I was so excited once you guys kind of brought this to me, or once you brought this to me, and then like Jack seemed really excited, and we got Pedantic on and all of that. Like yes. This podcast idea has been one of the ones I've been looking forward to for quite some time, because I do think it's a perspective that I've missed. Like, I've always considered myself as someone who's like supports the LGBTQ community, but I hadn't really gotten in-depth opinions on media from that community. And so things like, I never would have personally even thought to consider Hisoka as a problematic character until you guys brought it up. I think is really interesting, and that's something that I'm still going to have to consider in terms of like media criticism. So it's always cool to have these kind of like different perspectives, and particularly with like a kind of heavier topic like this. Thank you guys for handling this so gracefully.
Thanks.
Of course.
Because it's definitely one of those things that I feel like it would be easy for us to like step on our toes or something like that. But I feel like this has been something that for me at least, like, I didn't do a lot of talking this episode, but I felt like I was learning quite a bit throughout it.
Yeah, I have learned a lot, I guess. I mean, not like something, I don't know. Never mind, just edit that whole thing out. Becker, sorry.
We're leaving it all in. We're doing it live. Don't worry about it.
Now that I exist as an omniscient being, I have learned nothing because I know everything that there is in the world to be conscious of. But I appreciate your efforts nonetheless.
All right. So, is there anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap up?
No, I think I said all I had written down, or most of it that was relevant.
All right, so thanks everyone for watching the Our Anime podcast. This has been a long one, so hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, subscribe, like the video. Hopefully, go and check out like Pedantic's channel. Like, that's cool.
Check out Zaria's video on Bloom Into You, which should be out now.
Yeah,
yep, that should be out. Yep. We'll have links to all of this like stuff in the description, along with social media that I'm forgetting all of the social media we have, so we might edit that in. See you guys later.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye.